Hi, my name is Hilary Tejada, and this is a workshop on writing for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I'm an instructor myself in both writing and science, and I'm very excited to share this workshop with you because I think it is so important for scientists to communicate clearly. Everybody in this world at some point has to interact with science, whether they're scientists or not. And so it's important for those of us who are in science to be able to communicate well to people outside of our scientific field and also to people who aren't in science at all. Whenever I do a piece of science writing, I want it to be clear and well supported with evidence and accurate, and that builds trust between the reader and the author, and also it builds trust on a larger scale between the non-scientist and the scientific community. So it's a very important topic we're about to jump into. So let's get started. In a college class, in a science class, you'll either have to write a lab report and or a research report and or an opinion piece. I am going to focus on the research report, but everything I say can apply in one way or another to the other two options. And here are 4 things that all science professors are going to look for in your writing. First of all, an interesting research question. That's the most important, the basis. A good question will carry you through the report. Second of all, evidence. That's what we want as scientists. We want to see evidence backing up your statements. Third of all, clear writing so that the evidence is explained clearly. And fourth of all, but not least, accuracy. Things need to be accurate. And this is especially important now that we have AI, which, as we all know, can sometimes not be accurate. Quick caveat, whatever writing assignment you have, make sure that you look at the professor's rubric ahead of time, and if they have provided any sample assignments, look at those carefully too. Now, to start this paper, both you and your professor want to be happy with the research question that you posed, so let's go over a few items as far as that goes. Remember that a topic is different from a research question. A topic is a specific area of interest, like everything to know about the red panda, or how does a windmill work? That's not a research question. That's settled information. It might be a very good, interesting collection of information, but it's not a research question. A research question is something that you look into, you find evidence, and then you prove or disprove your final conclusion about whatever question you came up with. And what makes an effective research question? First of all, it has to be debatable. It has to pose a problem. The evidence could be interpreted one way or another way. There's different kinds of evidence to bear on this problem. Smart and interesting people will have different opinions and different ideas about this question. And it has to be doable within the parameters that you have. If it's a 6-week paper or if it's a capstone paper, those will be different size of questions. It has to, of course, require research. And it has to promote inquiry. Go into this research paper with an open mind, willing to bring in new ideas. Maybe you think you know the answer to your question, but actually, as you learn more about it, you'll find out, oh, actually, I wasn't quite right about this. Maybe I was completely wrong. You have to be able to have that open mind, and your question will reflect that. And it has to be compelling, super interesting to you, especially because you are the one that has to do the work to get this thing done. Some common problems I've seen in student research questions are either that the question is too big or too small, not enough information on it, too fuzzy, not quite sure what they're asking, sort of interesting topic, but not sure. Maybe just not interesting to the student. They just picked something because they had to, and then they realized, not so interesting. Or they've gone for the report idea, kind of from high school, of everything there is to know about windmills, and it's not really a research question. So if you're thinking this question might be a little too large or a little too little or a little too amorphous, fuzzy to tackle, what are some thought questions you can ask yourself to help refine your question? How much time do you have? How long does a paper need to be? Basic questions. Is there something specific that the professor said it has to be about, or is it totally up to you? What drew you to this question? And I gave this part 3 stars because you have to really choose a question that you're really interested in, something drew it to you. Maybe you're interested in red pandas, but why are you interested in red pandas? Are you interested in their, because they're so unusual? Are you interested in their fact that they're endangered? Are you interested in all kinds of mammals? Maybe there's not enough on the red panda. You could move to a different mammal, anything like that. Do you want to travel? Are you just interested in their habitat? What part of it really got you excited? Is there a way to limit the scope of the question? Is a big one. If the question is too big, can you limit it to how does such and such affect only college students? Or how does, say, ocean acidification instead of affect life in the ocean, how does it affect corals in the Caribbean? You can keep limiting by place, by population, by time, by type of coral even, so that you won't have to do so much research and you'll be able to keep your question limited. And is there a general outline of debate on the issue? Is it a debatable issue? Is there a compare contrast you can do? Or is there 3 different solutions you can do? Look at all kinds of stuff like that. So think about these types of questions as you're writing your research question. Here are some examples. This is a question that came up in one of my classes. A student wrote this question: are patients in California's skilled nursing facilities being provided proper baseline care? Now, when I first saw that question, I thought, oh my gosh, that is too big. That sounds like something a government committee would work together over months to try to answer. But actually, it turned out that this was specific enough. She was referring to California skilled nursing facilities, which is a specific group of nursing facilities. She was also referring to proper baseline care, which is actually a defined thing. What is baseline care? There's a few things that define it. And it turns out there's a lot of research, and it's easy to find on these things. There's surveys, there's doctors' reports. So it was actually quite easy to come up with some good research, and it was limited enough to make it a good paper. And it was important to her too, because she had had a family member who was in or had been in a skilled nursing facility. So there was all the criteria were met. It was super important. It was specific enough. It wasn't too big or too large, and there was research available. Perfect, it turned out. Here's another one. Why is coal in China the largest source of air pollution? So now I'm not quite sure. It's a fascinating topic, air pollution, coal, China, but I'm not quite sure what this student was going for. Were they going for why is the chemistry behind coal creating a lot of air pollution? Why is China different from other countries in terms of how they power their factories? Or is it maybe the economics? Why did China choose coal instead of renewables? So it was just a little bit too fuzzy when she started with this question. It turned into a much better question in the end. In the end, it turns out that China is moving towards renewable energy. So her question became more of how well is China's move to renewable energy going? What have they done to accelerate the process? What can we learn from China's example of moving towards renewable energy? And so it turned out to be a much more interesting question than this kind of fuzzy one, which I wasn't quite sure what she was going for. Okay, so here are 2 questions for you to try. The 2 questions are: what are the major cities of Asia doing to combat air pollution? And would making gym memberships free to the public reduce the obesity rate in the United States? So go ahead, think about those, answer those questions, and then come back and I'll tell you what I think. We're back. Okay, let's look at the first possible research question. What are the major cities of Asia doing to combat air pollution? Well, for me, I'm looking at that and thinking that's way too big. First of all, how many cities are major cities in Asia? There's too many of them. Second of all, apart from the size, it sounds more like a report. You just go and find out what's Singapore doing to combat air pollution, what's Beijing doing to combat air pollution, what's Kuala Lumpur doing to combat air pollution. It's not actually research. This is just known facts. You can go to every government's website and find out what they're doing to combat air pollution. So it's not really debatable, and it's way too big. Could be something like, what can we learn from how Singapore has combated air pollution? Does Singapore's air pollution policies, can they be applied to the United States, would be a really interesting question. Singapore's been quite successful in combating air pollution, but they also have a different political system. They have different economics than the United States. So it would be a very interesting question to see, could we apply their policies or their projects and their programs to a city in the United States? That might be one thing you could do. Second question, would making gym memberships free to the public reduce the obesity rate in the United States? Well, it's very specific, right? Making gym memberships free. It's limited to the United States. It's definitely debatable. Kind of like, would people take this economic advantage and use it for their health? Or do people need something more to motivate themselves to get more exercise? Or is exercise maybe not the main question? Maybe obesity is more complicated than that. And so this free gym membership wouldn't actually have that big of an effect. To be honest, I wasn't really sure the student would be able to find enough information on this very specific topic, but as he looked into it, he could find different insurance programs, for example, provide free memberships, and there's been some research on does that help the people who are in that insurance program lose weight? Are those people less overweight? Is there less rate of obesity in those people than others? There was some research on that, and this particular student was super interested in this idea. So it was actually turned out to be a great project, great research question for that student. So that closes out the research question part of this workshop. But remember to brainstorm with other people. That helps a lot. And don't necessarily settle on your first question. If you pick a question and you start working on it for a week and you're finding out, this is not really working, change early in the semester to get a new question that will work better. Also, of course, talk with your professor, talk with the writing center. Get that first step of the research question down, and it will help so much for the rest of your paper. Okay, so the next thing I want to tackle that professors are looking for in science writing is clarity. Are you writing clearly, and are you structuring your paper clearly? I'm going real old school with this because science is complicated. So it's much easier to have your basic structure. Just stick with your basic structure as you're putting the essay together. You'll have enough trouble explaining the science behind it, so don't get all fancy is my suggestion as far as the structure goes. I suggest, basic introduction, body of the paper, conclusion. Keep it simple. When you do that, though, this is very helpful because you need to know, you got to put it in the introduction, what is the main point you're getting across? And can you structure the paper so that each paragraph supports that main point? Maybe you want to make a pro-con table to help you organize your thoughts. Maybe you want to do a mind map or an outline, but make sure that there's definite structure and you've got that introduction, you've got the body, which supports point by point by point by point, your main point, and then finally your conclusion, which basically refers back to that question you asked at the very beginning, and you've come step by step to build your answer, and you just say the answer one more time. It may seem boring because you've already said the answer a couple times, but it's not boring. It's clarifying. The other thing is paragraph structure. Again, I'm going to go very old school because it helps so much. Basically, the point of a paragraph is it has a main point. It's got the body of the paragraph supporting the main point, and then you repeat that topic sentence. And your paragraph should only have one main point. I love this particular website, academic-englishuk.com. They've got a great explanation of what makes a good basic academic paragraph, and it works so well for science writing. This is your basic paragraph. It's got a topic sentence, then a development sentence or two, which develops that idea in the topic. Then it's got the example, which is evidence or data or statistics to support your main point. And then it's got a summary sentence, which basically repeats the topic sentence. Even though it may seem boring, to write that summary sentence, it helps so much for the reader. So this is what I go to all the time. and I encourage my students to do it. Sometimes I'll even have my students color code their sentences for me so that they're making sure that they're following this basic structure. It may change a little bit. It may go topic, sentence, development, example, another development, another example, another development, another example, all of those 3 examples supporting the main point, and then a summary sentence. But it's this basic paragraph structure works great so much of the time. So I really highly recommend it. Here's some common problems. Common problems for the structure and for the clarity. Big common problem that I see is the essay is all over the place. They got some really interesting research about this sort of aspect of the question, and they've got some information over here about another aspect, and it's kind of not really tying together, and we're not really quite sure what the main point is. So that's one thing. You've got to, if that happens, choose your one main point. Then ask yourself, is this research supporting that main point, or is this research not related to that main point? Not cherry picking. I mean, the research will either support or not support, but is this research about that main point, right? The evidence may show you, yes, it's happening, or the evidence may show you, no, it's not happening, but at least it's about the question that you asked. Sometimes a paragraph can be all over the place. I see this all the time. Whenever that happens, just go back to that structure on the previous slide, and if you've got 3 points in that paragraph, pull it out and make 3 paragraphs, each one with evidence supporting the 1 point. And then, of course, there's sentence structure and grammar, which I'm not going to go over in this workshop, but it's stuff that you're probably familiar with, and you just have to keep looking or ask Grammarly. Run-ons, comma splices, extra words. For any of these issues, you can go to the Writing Center or get a friend to read your paper and say, hey, that's actually a comma splice. You probably shouldn't have that. That extra words, read it out loud. That's how you can deal with all this stuff here. But we're not going to do that too much in this particular workshop. So here's an example of a paragraph, and let's look at it for structure, if it fits the clear, simple structure that I outlined earlier. I'm kind of long, so I'm just going to read it to you. Often forgetting consequences, humans are very selfish, throwing jabs or jokes at climate change. What's a few more degrees going to hurt? The impact of those few degrees is what has changed in recent years the drasticity and effectiveness of wildfires. The annual burned area in the western U.S. from 1987 to 2003 was more than 6 times the amount annually burned from 1970 to 1986. AGU Pubs. Nothing to joke about. The devastating amount and effectiveness of wildfires can be easily attributed to the rise in temperature, which in 1987 to 2003 was 0.87 Kelvin warmer than the years 1970 to 1986, often contributing to longer, hotter summers and earlier, drier springs, which causes snow caps to melt prematurely and prolonged droughts because of the lack of wet, rainy seasons. California itself is no stranger to drought, the earliest recorded drought in California dating back to 1928. While being no stranger, California has seen an increasing number of droughts in recent years. The entirety of the 20th century only showing 2 recorded droughts. Meanwhile, the 21st century is finishing the second and most severe drought ever recorded in California, and we are less than 25 years into the century. Okay, so what do I think about this paragraph? I think it's super important, and there's some good data in there about the annual burned area and the number of droughts. But I also think there's a few problems. My first problem is exactly what, and this is the biggest problem, exactly what is the most important thing to the writer? What is his main point? If I look at his first sentence, which should be the topic sentence, it kind of sounds like it's more about human attitudes towards climate change. And he mentions joking twice about that, and it's in the topic sentence. So I'm ready to hear more about attitudes toward climate change. But then there's nothing else about that. So then, well, maybe it's about the impact of climate change on burn area or on wildfires. So we have a couple sentences here that talk about the impact of the degrees is what has changed the drasticity and effectiveness of wildfires. And the devastating amount of wildfires can be easily attributed to the rise in temperature, which was this. And he gave us some data on the rise in temperature, not data actually on the attribution of the rise in temperature causing the wildfires, which is the big question people are trying to ask. Are the wildfires directly due to climate change? How much you hear that on the news all the time. What is the chance this wildfire wouldn't happen if we hadn't had climate change? It's a good question. And we've got a couple sentences on it. But then we go into droughts. The earliest recorded drought was back in 1928. We've had increasing droughts in recent years. And the most severe droughts ever recorded have happened in the 21st century, and we're only 25 years into it. So it seems like there's three ideas that this student has, and they're all great ideas. One is the attitude of people towards climate change. Another is the effect of climate change on wildfires. And another is just droughts in general. And then there's no final sentence. So my suggestion would be for the student to decide what is most important. What do they really want to talk about? Do they want to talk about attitudes toward climate change? Do they want to talk about the effect of climate change on wildfires? Do they want to talk about droughts in California? And whatever that topic is, put that topic directly into the topic sentence. I happen to know that the paper turned out to be about wildfires, so a topic sentence would be the impact of climate change and global warming has a noticeable effect on wildfires in California. There's quite a bit of evidence to show this, for example. That could be a topic sentence. And then you would repeat that same exact idea in the summary sentence. Later on, if you want to talk about attitudes toward climate change, you could make that a new section of your paper. It's kind of a different question. If you want to talk about how droughts have gotten worse and how that relates to wildfires, that could be another paragraph as well. Let's look at another one. This one, the student actually followed the guidelines in the color coding of the guidelines. We've got topic, sentence, development, evidence, and conclusion or summary sentence. And I think this is a fantastic paragraph. Saffron, scientifically known as the dried stigmas of the Crocus sativus L plant, is a multi-purpose plant that has been used for various medicinal purposes in many countries. According to Britannica, saffron is cultivated in Iran, Spain, France, Italy, and some parts of India. It has been used for centuries in traditional medicine due to its vast properties. An article from Healthline talks about the health benefits of saffron, and it features several potential benefits, including the ability to improve memory in adults with Alzheimer's disease, lower blood sugar levels, aid in weight loss, reduce PMS symptoms, and most importantly, improve mood and treat depressive symptoms, Raman. Additionally, research findings reveal that saffron is included in the catalogs of medicinal plants in European pharmacopoeias, spanning from the 16th century to the 20th century. Baker. Saffron has been cherished around the world for its wide range of medicinal benefits and its rich history as a superherb, making it a truly unique and versatile natural remedy. Okay, I love this paragraph. I know exactly what they're talking about. It's saffron with its many medicinal purposes. The development talked about where it's been used, and it talks about how long it's been used. And then these two well-cited pieces of evidence support what was said here in the topic sentence and the development. The only thing I might have done differently myself in this paragraph is I would probably have put this sentence about the 16th century uses of saffron before this sentence also in evidence of about modern uses for saffron. In other words, I would have reversed these two sentences. It just makes more sense in my mind to do it chronologically. But other than that, I think this is a great model paragraph. And here are a couple for you to try. And I'm back. Here is a short paragraph. See what you thought about it compared to what I think about it. By now, virtually everyone has eaten a processed food item and have wondered what they were consuming. Unfortunately, even with classifications like NOVA and plenty of research on the topic of ultra-processed food, we have not yet recognized the dangers of what we consume. As of recently, there has been a multitude of ethical concerns of whether manufacturers should be producing food they know is unhealthy and if they should pander to a younger audience. So for me, this paragraph just has too many ideas, interesting ideas, but it's got basically three. What do we know? Do we know what we're eating in ultra-processed food? Then there's the ethical concern, should manufacturers be producing this food? And then there's the ethical question, should they be pandering to a younger audience? Should they be advertising and creating products that appeal to kids? That's three big important questions, but they should not all be mushed together in one paragraph. Even if this is a transition paragraph, it's not very helpful. So there should be paragraphs about what we know about UPFs, and then if the student wants to continue on to the ethical concerns, make new paragraphs about that and just start the new paragraph with a topic sentence. You don't really need a transition paragraph. This paragraph is just a little bit too confusing. Too many ideas being thrown at me, no evidence for any of them, and no development of any of them. So not the greatest paragraph in the world, although fantastically interesting topic. Here's the second paragraph you looked at on your own. I'll read it first. The current state of practice surrounding mental health with refugees from war is quite interesting and has made lots of improvements in the mental health of refugees. There are a lot of practices that are utilized for war refugees with mental health issues. In the study, the 10-year course of Mental Health, Quality of Life, and Exile Life Functioning in Traumatized Refugees from Treatment Start, they talk about the methods used for the study, which have been helpful for refugees with trauma in their past. The study utilized things like psychotherapy and psychological therapy, OPAS-5, along with traumatized refugees. This study showed the participants improved significantly in symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and depression, OPAS-10, from the use of practices like therapy. This quote from the study not only shows what the current practices associated with the mental health of traumatized refugees is, but also shows how effective the practices are when dealing with mental health. I think the current practices are a great step in the right direction, especially considering how far the help for refugees has come. These current practices surrounding the mental health of refugees have clearly been helpful for traumatized refugees, and the development of these practices will continue to develop. Now, the first thing I want to say about this paragraph is it reflects a really good research question, which really was what's being done for refugees for their mental health, and is it working? And it was something that the author, the student, was very, very interested in with the wars going on in the world, Ukraine and Sudan. It was a very important issue for him. There's a few awkwardnesses in terms of citation and grammar, but what I love about this paragraph, apart from the topic itself, is that it has one point. And that one point is, what is the current state of practice surrounding mental health with refugees? It talks about that in the topic sentence, and it talks about what kinds of practices there are, psychotherapy and psychological therapy. It doesn't go into detail yet, but this was sort of a background paragraph. It talks about how effective these practices are. They improve significantly, and it keeps coming back to that idea of current practices and sums up these current practices surrounding mental health have clearly been helpful. He's going to go into more detail later, but this paragraph sets me up clearly for everything he's going to talk about, and I know exactly what this paper is going to be about, and I know what this paragraph is about as well. No question in my mind. So I like this paragraph a lot. Okay, so we've looked at formulating a great research question. We've looked at clarity of writing, clarity and structure of the essay, clarity and structure of the paragraph. Let's turn to evidence. Evidence is the heart of a science paper. You have to have evidence to answer your research question, to support your final conclusion. And these questions here that I've written down are questions to consider when you're putting forward your evidence. They stem from different mistakes that I've seen students make in their writing. And the questions are, is it there? That's kind of obvious. Is it correctly cited? Is it clearly explained? Did the student remember? Did you remember to list it in your reference section? If you're using it, it better be in the reference section too, or the work cited. And is it true and accurate? So let's look at some of these questions. First, let's look at citing your evidence. Now, there's different style guides, and your professor will have the one they want you to use, maybe the APA or the MLA. So you'll have a preference. So I'm not talking about the details of the style guidelines of, where do you use a footnote, or do you use in-text parentheses? Do you use the page number? Do you use et al, or do you list all the authors? Now, I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about more basic problems that are commonly seen in evidence citing. The biggest problem is they give the evidence and they forget to cite it, or a student will give evidence and forget to cite it. Another big problem is the in-text citation has so much bibliographic information, it's awkward to read it. You'll see what I mean by that. And the third one is the source is just wrong. It's not the right authors that are listed when the evidence is given. So let's look at some examples. I have about 7, actually. In biological psychiatry, Martin H. Teicher, Carl M. Anderson, Kyoko Ohashi, and Ann Pocari have stated that early life stressors that induces epigenetic modifications, reprogram stress response systems, and alters trajectories of brain development. Martin H. Teicher, 214. So this part is fine, although they won't need the first name. They just need Teicher, 2014. But putting all these authors in the sentence just takes forever for me to read. It'd be much simpler to say, Teicher et al. Stated that da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Then I don't have to worry about reading all through this to actually get to the main point. It also seems like in this particular quote they left off a verb somewhere because the quote itself isn't a full idea. But I would just say Teicher et al. Have stated that da-da-da-da-da-da, and then put Martin H. Teicher, Teicher 2014 in parentheses at the end. That's all you need to do. Here's another one. One research conducted by the National Library of Medicine suggests vegan diets may protect against cardiovascular disease. So this is an example of where the stated author, the National Library of Medicine, is just incorrect. The National Library of Medicine has the article on their website, but they were not the authors of it. Happily, since the student had their reference list, I was able to go and check and point out, okay, this is the actual reference you need to use. Next one. Fast food consumption is heavily targeted on children, for their advertising is reaching targets as young as 3 years of age. Aside from the young age, children of Black and Hispanic descent are being targeted 50% more than their white counterpart. During fast food history, as the popularity increased in food items, the quality of the products have decreased. Okay, now hold on. This is an important piece of data. Children of Black and Hispanic descent are being targeted 50% more than their white counterpart. Now, I don't doubt that for a second, but the author, the student, needs to cite where they got that number from. It's a very important number, and I, as the reader, need to have the confidence that the author didn't make that number up, that they found it somewhere, and if I want to, I can go look and find out more about that. So that is a really interesting fact, and it's a number, and it really needs to have its inline citation or its in-text citation. Whoever wrote that article, Smith, 2012, put it right there. Next one. In this study, mice were treated with collagen peptides. They seemed to tolerate the collagen and had no adverse effects or health risks. Moreover, the collagen lasted in the mice for 24 months after treatment. Lots of good information, correctly cited. Perfect. That's just fine. The name and the author didn't get in the way of the information that the student was presenting, but the name of the author was there. So I could find the article by checking the reference section. Another one. In the study, it stated that bilingual patients are better at task switching because throughout their lives they've been practicing this constantly. Switching from one language to another builds a pattern of faster performance and stimulates lower frontal activation in the older bilingual group. So that's a very interesting quote. It's very fascinating. In this particular case, the student forgot or didn't put a citation, so I wouldn't be able to go back and find out where that quote actually came from, the context of it. Here's another one. When Medicare and Medicaid came into effect, minimum data sets, MDS, were created to be a quality indicator. MDS's major objective is to measure the functional, behavioral, social, and clinical aspects of nursing home patients. Loretz, 2013. So this is another one where everything is done perfectly. Good information, quick little citation at the end. No extraneous words that gets me lost in the text before I even find out what the evidence is. And here's 3 for you to try. let's work on them, and then we'll come back and see if you and I have the same ideas about these different citations. And we're back. Let's look at the first quote. Moreover, microalgae biodiesel has been found to produce significantly less carbon monoxide and hydrocarbon emissions than petroleum diesel, with some studies indicating even lower output. Bradley D. Whalen, 2012. Well, for me, as a science professor, this would be fine. This would be a perfect citation. There's the information, briefly and clearly cited. Definitely, he doesn't need the first name and middle initial. It could just be Whalen 2012, but that's minor compared to the fact that there's clear information, clearly cited. Okay, here's the next one. According to Psychology Today, they stated that Freud, who took ancient myths seriously, believed that myths like Oedipus and Narcissus illustrated themes deep in the human psyche. Okay, good information, but the citation is way too general. Psychology Today, that's the name of a journal or maybe the journal's webpage, but we need the name of the article, the name of the author, the date that it was written, and that will be in a proper citation in the reference section, and then right here you could just put the author's name right there. So this is a case where the citation is there in text, but it's the wrong author. It's not an author that they put in, it's the name of a journal. And the last one. In the article, Transportation Barriers to Care Among Frequent Healthcare Users During the COVID Pandemic, it was discussed that difficulty in getting to healthcare can cause delays and missed appointments, especially for disadvantaged groups like low-income individuals and those with chronic conditions. Well, even as I was reading that, you can see how putting the entire name of the article in the sentence just makes it awkward to read. By the time I get through the meaning of the title, I just have no mental energy left to see what they're actually saying was in the article. So this is a case where there's just too much bibliographic information. The whole title is in there, and it distracts from what is actually being said. I think this may come from maybe in high school when we wrote things like in Moby Dick by Herman Melville, where you put the whole title of the book and the whole author's name. But now with science articles, the title is very, very long, and often there's many, many authors, so you just can't put that into the text. Just distracts too much from what you're trying to say. It'd be much easier to say, Smith et al. Pointed out the difficulty in getting to healthcare. That difficulty in getting to healthcare can cause delays, Much easier, and then I can actually focus as a reader on what they actually said. Okay, so apart from citing the evidence correctly, the main thing is to explain the evidence well, and that is not always easy. Often when you're doing a research project, you're learning a whole new bunch of vocabulary and a whole new bunch of science just to be able to do your research. And it can be complicated. It's new stuff. For example, I did a research paper once on elderberry, and there are some chemicals in elderberry. There's cytosides and cytoglucosides. And I had to read that article over and over and over again before I finally realized, oh, they're talking about two different things, and one of them is toxic and one of them isn't. But because it was all new to me, it wasn't something that was easy. I had to read over and reread over and look things up. And then I finally figured out what they were saying. It was cyanocydes and glycocyanocydes. And so those are the kinds of things that you have to really dig into and let yourself learn before you can even explain them to somebody else. So common problems in explaining evidence stem often from not having taken the time to learn this new piece of science you need to know to do this research. Possibly a data piece or a quote was not copied correctly or completely, and if you're not really familiar with that science, you wouldn't catch it. Another problem is too many numbers or abbreviations in the quote. Possibly the quote is too long. And also you want to paraphrase evidence. You don't want to plagiarize it. So you either put it in quotes or you restate it in your own words, but you don't just obviously copy the text straight out of the article without quotes. Now, one thing about taking a quote out of an article, some professors will say you're not allowed to do that because it leads to too many problems like this, you'll see. Speaking of what you'll see, here's our first example. In the current process, the total CO2 equivalent emissions of wastewater treatment plants are approximately 3,027 tons of carbon dioxide emission. Although direct greenhouse gas emissions contribute to it, 2,860 carbon dioxide equivalent is from electricity usage. Well, this is hard to understand as it is. I think perhaps the student didn't quite understand the article. For one, it sounds like they're talking about wastewater treatments in general. Total wastewater treatment in the world produces this, but I happen to know that many tons of carbon dioxide is nowhere near what it would be globally. So that makes me think they're talking about one factory, one particular treatment plant rather, produce 3,000 tons of carbon dioxide, because normally you would say a wastewater treatment plant produces 2,000 tons of carbon dioxide per ton of water treated. So because they didn't give that type of a unit, it sounds like they're talking about one factory or one treatment plant, and that's not clear in this piece of evidence that's being given. So it's not helpful as it is right now. But the good thing is they did give a proper citation, which means the student and the professor can go back together and look at that article and figure out what that actually meant, all those numbers. Okay, let's look at the next one. Millions of tons of synthetically sourced nitrogen are applied to cropland in the United States annually, but as much as 30% of that fertilizer is lost to the atmosphere or into groundwater reserves. That's perfect. I understand it quite well, which means that the student that was writing it understood it as well. And we have some now for you to try. And we're back. Let me read this. Something that I found interesting was the numbers of the data on burnout. The prevalence of work-related burnout was found to be 60.47%, 95%, confidence interval equals 56.6 to 64.2, workplace violence, AOR equals 3.33, CI 2.02, 5.48, working hours over 60 hours a week, AOR equals 4.55. I don't even want to read it anymore. You see, the problem with this is that the student took this quote straight out of the article. It was probably in the abstract. They probably did it because they didn't really understand a lot of what was going on, or they understood it, but they couldn't quite put it into their own words. Probably because they didn't know what AOR and CI are. It would be very simple to say something like this. If you understood these numbers, you don't need to put all these numbers into your paper. The reader can go look up the confidence interval and these various statistics. But the writer could say the prevalence of work-related burnout was found to be about 60% amongst midwife workers. Workplace violence, working more than 60 hours a week, the emotional demands of the job, shorter job rotations, and generally being stressed were all strongly correlated with work-related burnout. I don't need to have any of those numbers as I'm explaining to my reader what was found in the paper, in the research. Sometimes you'll definitely want to put numbers into your evidence paragraphs, but not a ton of numbers all in this type of format. Often if there's a lot of numbers, you can put them into a table, or if there's a couple numbers, work them into the sentence, but make it in a way that you're doing it in your own words and you're reflecting an understanding of what those numbers are. Maybe they didn't know what AOR is, and if you're doing a research paper and you run across these things, you just have to Google it. You just have to take that time. Once you take the time to learn these things, these little details that just keep popping up in the research articles, then it makes a lot more sense. For example, I Googled AOR. It's adjusted odds ratio. It means the odds of an event occurring in a treatment group over the odds of an event occurring in a control group. So, for example, what are the odds of catching a cold if you're in the treatment group, which takes Sambucus every day, over a period of 3 months, versus the odds of you catching a cold over a period of 3 months if you're in the control group that doesn't take Sambucus every day? And so it's just a comparison of people who got the treatment versus people who didn't get the treatment. And adjusted odds ratio just means that the data has been adjusted to account for other predictor variables like age, income, etc. Easy enough to figure out, and you just have to take the time to Google those little abbreviations. Here's the next one you tried on your own. From 1955 to 1995, ocean thermal expansion is estimated about 0.4 millimeters per year to sea level rise, less than 25% of the observed rise over the same period. For the 1993 to 2003 decade, when thermal expansion is at about 1.6 millimeters per year for the upper 750 meters of the ocean alone, about 50% of the observed sea level rise of 3.1 millimeters per year. Church et al. So this is a case where the quote is much too long. The student needs to reread it. I think something's miscopied too, because as it is, that second sentence isn't even a sentence. It's not making sense. But they need to understand the material and explain it in their own words, not in quotes. It's an interesting point, but it needs to be clear for the reader. And one more. A textile mill that produces 8,000 kilograms of fabric each day will consume 1.6 million liters of water each day. Dottie et al. This is perfect. It tells me exactly what I need to know. The textile mill produces 8,000 kilograms of fabric, and that means it's consuming 1.6 million liters of water each day. That's a great statistic. It's well presented. It's clear. It's a surprising statistic, and it's not lost in a lot of detail or quotation. It's just, there it is. It's great. This is a great, well, clearly presented piece of evidence. And finally, we get to the fourth criteria that I mentioned at the beginning of this workshop, which is accuracy. Is the writing accurate? And common problems here are a student might exaggerate or use hyperbole in their writing. Sometimes you'll be reading something and like for your roommate or for your friend, and the numbers just sound wrong or the terms are not defined. And that's when maybe you're doing a peer review or you're reviewing your own work and you say, oh, shoot, that doesn't sound right. And another big problem is just when you read, you'll often read in news media, and I don't really like this at all. It says most scientists believe. But unless you can actually prove that most scientists believe, you shouldn't be saying that. Okay, so here are a few examples where accuracy might be in question. Let's look at them. In today's fast-paced and often chaotic world, the need to find inner peace is crucial, and there is one way to solve the problem. Amidst the hustle and bustle of our day-to-day lives, we can find ourselves getting overwhelmed by work, school, and/or life altogether. That is why we cannot overlook the practice of meditation and the benefits it can give us. So this is a pretty good statement, especially this part. That is why we cannot overlook the practice of meditation. The only part I didn't really like was there is one way to solve the problem. I mean, there are a few ways to find inner peace, and meditation is one of them. So it kind of depends on how you say it. The need to find inner peace is crucial, and there is one way to solve the problem, or the need to find inner peace is crucial, and there is one way to solve the problem. So you can't really tell by reading it which connotation was meant. So it would be much easier to say the need to find inner peace is crucial, and one way to solve the problem is meditation. Then go on from there. Next one. A chart from the CDC shows teen birth rate trends from the years 1960 to 2010, where teen pregnancy rates fall from 62% to 34.3% in this span of time, nearly halving this rate over time. Now, if you're tired, you can sort of read through that. You're reading your roommate's paper, or you're rereading yours, and you might not notice anything, but whoa, wait a minute here. From 1960 to 2010, teen pregnancy rates fell from 62% to 34%. That means in 2010, teen pregnancy rates were 34%. In other words, 3 out of 10 teens were pregnant. And back in 1960, 6 out of 10 teens got pregnant. Those sound very high to me. Think of all your friends from high school. Think of your college friends. Were 3 out of them pregnant as teens? 3 out of 10 of them? So when you see numbers like that just don't ring true, it's time to go back and check the original article and see what it actually said. Be very careful to check the X and Y axis to see whatever that chart is actually showing. Okay, the last one. Our skin is incredible, really. While only a few millimeters thick, it makes up 1/7 of our body weight. For the average adult, 2.7 kilograms to 3.6 kilograms. Or in other words, 6 to 8 pounds. So again, whoa, if our skin is at most 8 pounds and it makes up 1/7 of our body weight, 8 times 7 is 56. That means the average adult weighs 56 pounds. So something's wrong there too. And funnily enough, I came across this the day I was making this workshop, recording it. It was actually in a BBC article that said all this. So even respected news media, they will mess up on numbers every once in a while. You just have to be really, really careful. And now we have 3 for you to try. Have a look at them and see what you think about the accuracy of these statements. Okay, here's the first accuracy and evidence you try that you did. It has been proven in many experiments that the people who ate a vegan diet had a bacteria that was lower in firmicutes, which means their gut bacteria was in balance, and that means low inflammation. I am certain once a person starts eating a vegan diet, they will feel healthier and will not want to switch back to eating meat and fish and dairy again. Well, this student had written an article about whether vegan diets actually make you healthier, and his conclusion was yes, but then he just went a little bit over the top there with, I am certain you'll never go back to eating meat and fish and dairy again. I know, and you probably know, there's a lot of people that try vegetarian or try vegan, and they do it for a while, and they do go back to their other diet that they had before very often. So this is just a little too much of hyperbole, and it's not even true, because we all know that some people will give up on their vegan diet. Not to say it's not a good diet, it's just the way he presented his final conclusion was a little too much hyperbole. Here's the next one. The number of Americans who passed away from 2000 to 2013 because of gun misuse is more than the deaths caused by AIDS, drugs, war, and terrorism combined. Is that an accurate statement? It raised a red flag for me. More people died of guns than drugs in those years. So I looked it up, and I found that in 2013, for example, about 11,000 people in the U.S. died from guns, but 43,000 people died from drugs. So I went to the reference that the student had listed, and it turned out to be a YouTube by Vox, which is a news organization. And in this YouTube, they gave this statistic, and on the YouTube, they also gave the article where they got that statistic from, so the student could go and recheck that statistic, because it does not sound right to me. Okay, next one. Last one, actually. In summary, there seem to be more negative effects of staying or participating in long-distance relationships than to continue to remain in an unhealthy situation. More negative effects of staying in a long-distance relationship. That's what this article was about. With everything being stated, it mostly depends on each individual person and can vary from situation to situation. Though if a situation is causing depressive symptoms, then there's no valid justification. To restate my final judgment, the long-distance relationships are not worth it in the long run, especially when most studies state that less than 60% of long-distance relationships do not work out. So most studies state that's always a red flag for me, and I had to go look that one up. And I did find a study fairly quickly that said about 40% of long-distance relationships do work out. But that study was a fairly short-term study. It checked in with the couples after 4 months. So after 4 months, about 40% of those long-distance relationships were still apparently going strong. I wouldn't claim that most studies state that unless I'd read a whole bunch of articles or found some kind of summary review, which I did not find. But also the other fuzzy thing about this particular statement is, what defines success or working out? Does it mean a relationship that lasts for 4 months? Or does it mean a relationship that lasts for 2 years? Or does it mean a relationship that lasts for a lifetime? Since they didn't define what a successful long-distance relationship actually is, that statistic of less than 60% is hard to evaluate. So in this particular quote, there were actually two problems with accuracy. The phrase "most studies state" raised a red flag, and the student hadn't really established in the rest of the paper that there were many, many studies that stated this. And the second part, as I looked into it, was that that variable, successful long-distance relationships, that was not well defined. What exactly is a successful long-distance relationship? So we've come to the end of the workshop. I hope it's been helpful. And let's just go over the 4 main points you want to think about when you're doing science writing. First of all, a great research question will carry you through. Second of all, good evidence to back up your statements, carefully and clearly explained to the reader. Third of all, your writing should be clearly structured in both essay and paragraph and sentence. And finally, know your material well enough so that your statements are accurate and true and your science writing is trustworthy. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I wish you the best in all your science writing. Bye-bye.